I am Victoria Blackwood, 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life watching my older sister Caroline live what everyone believed was the perfect existence. Perfect husband, perfect house, perfect career, perfect everything. What nobody knew was that behind Caroline's flawless facade lay the most elaborate web of lies I'd ever encountered. And what she didn't know was that I'd been unraveling those lies, thread by thread, for the past 6 months. The truth came crashing down at what was supposed to be the celebration of her 5th wedding anniversary, in front of our entire extended family. As Caroline stood there accepting congratulations for her fairy tale marriage, I held in my hands the evidence that would destroy everything she'd built. But before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me take you back to where this story really begins. Growing up as Caroline's younger sister was like living in the shadow of a lighthouse. She was everything I wasn't, tall where I was petite, blonde where I was brunette, outgoing where I was reserved. From the moment I could understand comparisons, I heard them constantly. "Why can't you be more like Caroline?" Became the soundtrack of my childhood. Caroline was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was valedictorian of her high school class, homecoming queen, and had her pick of any college in the country. Meanwhile, I struggled with dyslexia that went undiagnosed until I was 16, making my academic achievements pale in comparison. Where Caroline excelled effortlessly, I had to fight for every B+ and every small victory. Our parents, Margaret and Henry Blackwood, were successful real estate developers who measured worth in achievements and appearances. Caroline fit their mold perfectly. She was their trophy daughter, the one they paraded at dinner parties and business functions. I was the afterthought, the one they introduced with apologetic smiles and explanations about how Victoria marches to her own drummer. The disparity in treatment wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. Caroline got a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday. I got a used Honda when I turned 18, and only after working part-time for a year to help pay for it. Caroline's college tuition was paid in full, along with her sorority fees, study abroad programs, and a generous monthly allowance. When it came time for my college education, suddenly the family was tightening their belts, and I graduated with student loans that took me years to pay off. But Caroline wasn't just the favorite child. She was also a master manipulator who knew exactly how to maintain her position. She had perfected the art of appearing selfless while being completely self-serving. When I finally saved enough money to buy my first professional camera equipment, I was majoring in photography. Caroline suddenly developed an interest in photography too. Within weeks, our parents had bought her a top-of-the-line camera system that cost 3 times what mine did. "I thought we could have a hobby together," she'd said with that innocent smile that fooled everyone but me. "Isn't that sweet? We can be photography sisters." Of course, her natural charm and our parents' financial backing meant that her photos were soon being featured in local galleries while I was still trying to book my first paid gig. The photography phase lasted exactly as long as it took for her to upstage me, then she moved on to her next conquest. College provided some respite from Caroline's shadow. I chose a school 3 states away, deliberately picking one she'd never consider attending because it wasn't prestigious enough for her tastes. For 4 blissful years, I was just Victoria, not Caroline's little sister. I discovered that without constant comparison, I actually thrived. My photography skills flourished, I made genuine friends who valued me for who I was, and I even had a serious relationship with a wonderful guy named Marcus who never made me feel like I was competing with anyone. Those college years taught me something valuable. Away from Caroline's orbit, I could be myself. I was funny, creative, and capable of inspiring loyalty in others. My professors praised my unique perspective, and my photographs began winning awards in student competitions. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something that was truly mine. But graduation meant returning home, at least temporarily, and that meant sliding back into familiar patterns. Caroline had landed what seemed like the perfect job at a prestigious marketing firm in the city, working for a company that handled high-profile clients. She was making excellent money, living in a beautiful apartment, and dating a series of successful men who all seemed to worship the ground she walked on. I moved back in with our parents to save money while I built my photography business from the ground up. Every family dinner became an opportunity for Caroline to regale us with stories of her glamorous life while I picked at my food and tried to make my own modest achievements sound noteworthy. Got a new client today, I'd venture. Oh, that's nice, dear, my mother would reply absently before turning back to Caroline. Now tell us more about that charity gala you're organizing. It was during this period that Caroline met James Wellington. James was everything our parents had always dreamed of in a son-in-law, handsome, successful, from a wealthy family, and completely smitten with Caroline. He was a junior partner at a prestigious law firm, drove a Tesla, and owned a beautiful townhouse in the most exclusive part of the city. The way Caroline told the story, their meeting was straight out of a romantic movie. They'd literally bumped into each other at a coffee shop, spilling her latte all over his expensive suit. Instead of being angry, he'd asked her out to dinner to make up for the inconvenience of having to get his suit cleaned. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The engagement party was a lavish affair that our parents insisted on hosting at the country club. Caroline wore a designer dress that cost more than I made in 3 months, and James presented her with a ring that looked like it could be seen from space. Everyone oohed and awed over the perfect couple, making toasts about true love and fairy tale endings. I smiled and played my part, offering congratulations and taking endless photos of the happy couple, but something felt off about the whole thing. Maybe it was professional instinct. As a photographer, I'd learned to read people through my lens, but James seemed nervous in a way that went beyond normal pre-engagement jitters. And Caroline? She seemed more focused on the performance than the man beside her. The wedding planning was a year-long extravaganza that consumed our family's attention completely. Caroline had opinions about every detail, from the shade of ivory for her dress to the specific variety of roses in her bouquet. Our mother threw herself into the planning with the fervor of someone organizing a royal wedding, and our father wrote check after check with barely concealed pride. As the maid of honor, a role I accepted out of family obligation rather than genuine excitement, I had a front row seat to the chaos. Caroline was demanding, changeable, and stressed about details that seemed insignificant to everyone else. She fired 2 wedding planners before finding one who could meet her exacting standards. But it was during a dress fitting 3 months before the wedding that I first glimpsed the cracks in Caroline's perfect facade. We were at the boutique, and Caroline was having her final alterations done when her phone rang. She stepped away to take the call, leaving me with the seamstress who was making small talk. "Your sister is so lucky to have found someone like Mr. Wellington," the woman said, pinning Caroline's hem. "Though I have to say he seemed quite nervous when he came in with her last week. Almost like he was having second thoughts." Before I could respond, Caroline returned, her face flushed and her voice slightly sharp as she ended her call. "Sorry, work emergency," she said, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't work at all. The wedding itself was everything Caroline had dreamed of: a fairy tale event at a 5-star resort with 200 guests, a 7-course dinner, and a band that had played for celebrities. Caroline looked stunning in her custom gown, and James cleaned up well in his designer tuxedo. The photographer they'd hired, not me, because Caroline said she wanted me to enjoy the day as family, captured every moment of what appeared to be a perfect celebration. During the reception, I watched James carefully. He smiled at all the right moments, danced with Caroline like a devoted husband, and gave a toast that brought tears to my mother's eyes. But there was something in his expression when he thought no one was looking, a sort of resigned sadness that made me wonder if he was as happy as he appeared. The first few years of their marriage seemed to validate everyone's belief in their perfect union. Caroline and James bought a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, went on exotic vacations that Caroline documented extensively on social media, and hosted dinner parties that were featured in the lifestyle section of the local newspaper. Caroline left her marketing job to start her own consulting firm, which appeared to be thriving based on her expensive wardrobe and frequent business trips. Meanwhile, my own life was slowly gaining momentum. My photography business was growing steadily, and I'd finally moved into my own apartment. I'd even started dating someone, a kind, funny graphic designer named Alex, who thought my family dynamics were fascinating in the way that people find dysfunctional families entertaining when they're not their own. But it was Alex who first pointed out something I'd been too close to see clearly. We were at a family barbecue about 3 years into Caroline's marriage, and he was observing the interactions with the fresh eyes of an outsider. Does it strike you as weird that Caroline and James never actually look at each other when they're talking? He asked quietly as we watched them work the party like a political couple, always together but somehow separate. I started paying closer attention after that, and Alex was right. Caroline and James had perfected the art of appearing connected while maintaining an invisible distance. They touched each other in public, hands on shoulders, brief kisses on cheeks, but it all looked choreographed rather than spontaneous. They talked about we and us constantly, but I realized I'd never actually seen them have a genuine conversation about anything meaningful. The first real crack in their facade appeared during Caroline's 30th birthday party. It was another lavish affair, held at an exclusive restaurant that Caroline had rented out entirely for the evening. James had surprised her with a weekend trip to Paris, and Caroline was effusive in her gratitude, kissing him dramatically and declaring him the most thoughtful husband in the world. But later that evening, when I went to get my coat from the coat check, I overheard a conversation that made me stop in my tracks. James was on his phone in the corridor, speaking in low, urgent tones. "I can't keep doing this, Sarah," he was saying. "It's been 3 years and I'm dying inside. I know what we agreed, but I never thought it would be this hard to pretend." I ducked behind a pillar, my heart racing. Sarah? Who was Sarah? And what were they pretending about? "I love you too," James continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But you know why we can't be together publicly. Your father would destroy both our careers. At least this way we can still see each other, even if it has to be in secret." My mind reeled as the pieces started falling into place. James was having an affair, but not in the way I'd initially thought. This wasn't a husband cheating on his wife, this was something else entirely. Something that involved careers and fathers and agreements about pretending. Over the next few months, I found myself paying closer attention to Caroline and James's relationship, looking for clues to what I'd overheard. I noticed things I'd missed before. The way James's smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at Caroline, how they slept in separate bedrooms, Caroline claimed it was because James snored, and how they never seemed to have any physical affection that wasn't performed for an audience. But it was Caroline's behavior that really began to puzzle me. For someone living such a perfect life, she seemed increasingly stressed and secretive. She was always on her phone, taking calls that she claimed were from clients, but that seemed to agitate her rather than energize her. Her consulting business, which she'd always described in vague terms, appeared to require a lot of evening meetings and weekend work. I decided to do a little investigating of my own. It started innocently enough. I was curious about Caroline's consulting firm, which had a professional website but very little concrete information about what services they actually provided. The testimonials were generic, the case studies were vague, and when I tried to research some of the clients mentioned, I couldn't find any evidence that they existed. Digging deeper, I discovered that Caroline's business license was legitimate, but there was no record of the firm paying any significant taxes, which would be unusual for a company successful enough to fund Caroline's lavish lifestyle. The address listed for the business was a P.O. box, and when I drove by the office building she claimed to work from, the receptionist had never heard of Caroline's company. My photographer's instinct for detail and my natural curiosity had always served me well, but now they were leading me down a rabbit hole that was making me question everything I thought I knew about my sister's life. If Caroline's business wasn't real, where was her money coming from? And what did any of this have to do with James's strange phone conversation? The breakthrough came 6 months ago, during what should have been a routine family dinner. Caroline had arrived late as usual, claiming she'd been in a client meeting that had run long. She was agitated and distracted, barely touching her food and checking her phone constantly. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Our mother asked with the concern she reserved exclusively for Caroline. "Fine, just work stress. Caroline replied, but her smile was strained. Big client, demanding timeline. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it was because I was beginning to suspect that Caroline's work stress had nothing to do with legitimate consulting and everything to do with whatever game she and James were playing. After dinner, Caroline excused herself to take another work call, and I followed her outside under the pretense of getting some fresh air. She was standing by her car, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone who clearly wasn't a client. "I can't keep doing this much longer," she was saying, echoing James's words from months earlier. "The pressure is getting to me and I'm making mistakes. What if someone finds out?" She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call. "I know what's at stake," she continued, her voice getting sharper. "But you don't understand what it's like living this lie every single day. Pretending to be something I'm not, pretending to love someone I don't. The money isn't worth it anymore." Money. There it was, the missing piece I'd been looking for. Caroline's perfect life wasn't funded by a successful consulting business. It was funded by something else entirely. Something that involved pretending to love someone she didn't. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I followed Caroline discreetly, documenting her real activities with the same attention to detail I brought to my professional photography work. What I discovered was that Caroline's days bore no resemblance to those of a successful consultant. Instead of client meetings, she spent her afternoons at expensive spas, shopping at boutiques, and meeting with a woman I eventually identified as Sarah Chen, the same Sarah from James's phone conversation. Sarah was a beautiful, sophisticated woman in her early 30s who worked as an art curator at a prestigious gallery downtown. But Sarah wasn't just James's secret girlfriend. She was also clearly Caroline's close friend and confidant. I watched them have lunch together multiple times, engaged in intense conversations that looked more like strategy sessions than casual catch-ups. Whatever was going on, both women were in on it together. The final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to follow James instead of Caroline. His routine was more predictable. He really did work at the law firm where he claimed to be a partner. But his evenings told a different story. Instead of coming home to Caroline, he would drive to Sarah's apartment building, where he would stay for hours before returning home well after midnight. At first, I thought I was witnessing a straightforward affair. But the more I observed, the more I realized this wasn't about cheating in any conventional sense. James and Sarah were clearly in love, genuinely, deeply in love in a way that was obvious even from a distance. When they were together, James's entire demeanor changed. He became animated, affectionate, and genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen him with Caroline. And Caroline knew about it. That became clear the night I saw her drop James off at Sarah's building, kissing him on the cheek before driving away with a smile that looked more relieved than heartbroken. This wasn't a wife being deceived. This was a wife who was facilitating her husband's affair. The question was why? What could possibly motivate Caroline to live in a fake marriage while her husband conducted an open relationship with another woman? The answer, I suspected, had everything to do with money and appearances, the two things that had always mattered most to our family. I spent the next few months gathering evidence, building a comprehensive picture of Caroline's deception. I documented her fake business, her real daily activities, and the complex relationship between her, James, and Sarah. I researched property records, business filings, and financial documents that painted a picture of a lifestyle funded by something other than legitimate work. What I discovered was that Caroline and James's marriage was essentially a business arrangement designed to benefit both parties. James gained the appearance of a heterosexual marriage that protected his career prospects at his conservative law firm, while Caroline gained access to James's family money and the social status that came with being a Wellington. But the arrangement was more complex than simple mutual benefit. Through careful investigation, I learned that Sarah Chen wasn't just James's girlfriend. She was the daughter of one of James's law firm's biggest clients, a wealthy businessman whose account was worth millions to the firm. James couldn't risk his relationship with Sarah becoming public because it would create a conflict of interest that could destroy both his career and the firm's relationship with her father. So Caroline served as the perfect beard, allowing James to maintain his professional reputation while conducting his real relationship in secret. In exchange, James funded Caroline's lavish lifestyle, including her fake consulting business, which was actually just a way to launder money from James's family trust into Caroline's accounts. The more I uncovered, the more elaborate the deception became. Caroline hadn't just lied about her business, she'd lied about almost everything. Her expensive wardrobe was purchased with James's money, her exotic vacations were covers for James and Sarah's romantic getaways, Caroline would go separately and take photos to maintain the illusion, and even her social media presence was carefully curated to hide the truth. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was that Caroline wasn't just complicit in the arrangement, she was actively profiting from it beyond what James was paying her. She had been using her position as his wife to gather information about his clients, which she was then selling to competitors through a network of contacts she'd built during her brief career in marketing. Caroline had turned her fake marriage into a lucrative espionage operation, and neither James nor Sarah had any idea that their secret was funding Caroline's transformation into a white-collar criminal. As I pieced together the full scope of Caroline's deception, I felt a mixture of emotions I'd never experienced before. There was satisfaction in finally understanding the truth behind her perfect facade, but also a strange sort of disappointment. I'd spent my whole life believing that Caroline was simply better than me at everything, that her success was the result of natural superiority and parental favoritism. Learning that it was all built on lies didn't diminish the pain of those childhood comparisons, but it did reframe them entirely. Caroline hadn't succeeded through talent or hard work, she'd succeeded through deception and manipulation on a scale I'd never imagined possible. The question now was what to do with this information. I had enough evidence to destroy Caroline's reputation, end her arrangement with James, and potentially send her to prison for corporate espionage. But she was still my sister, and despite everything, the thought of actively destroying her life felt overwhelming. I decided to wait for the right moment, hoping that Caroline might confess her deception on her own or that the situation would resolve itself naturally. But as her 5th wedding anniversary approached and our parents began planning another lavish celebration of her perfect marriage, I realized that Caroline had no intention of coming clean. If anything, she seemed to be doubling down on the performance, planning an anniversary party that would be even more elaborate than her original wedding. She'd hired a photographer, still not me, booked the same resort where they'd been married, and sent out invitations to 200 guests for what she was billing as a celebration of true love. The irony was too much to bear. I couldn't sit quietly while Caroline accepted congratulations for a marriage that was nothing more than an elaborate fraud, especially when I knew that her success had been built on lies while I'd struggled to build something real and honest with my own life. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would attend Caroline's anniversary party, and I would finally reveal the truth about her perfect life. I had 6 months of evidence, dozens of photographs, and financial records that would expose not just the fake marriage but the criminal enterprise Caroline had built around it. The only question was how to do it in a way that would force Caroline to face the consequences of her actions while minimizing the collateral damage to the innocent people in her orbit. James was complicit in the marriage fraud, but he wasn't involved in Caroline's corporate espionage. Sarah was having an affair with a married man, but she had no idea that their secret was funding criminal activity. And then there were our parents, who had spent their entire lives believing in Caroline's perfection, and who would be devastated to learn that their golden child was not just a fraud but a criminal. But my mind was made up. I'd spent 34 years living in Caroline's shadow, watching her take credit for achievements she didn't earn and love she didn't deserve. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter how painful it might be for everyone involved. The anniversary party was set for a Saturday evening in early October, exactly 5 years to the day after Caroline and James's wedding. I spent the weeks leading up to it organizing my evidence, printing photographs, and preparing a presentation that would leave no doubt about the reality of Caroline's situation. I also made some difficult decisions about my own life. I talked to Alex about what I was planning to do, explaining the full scope of what I'd discovered and warning him that being associated with me might become complicated once the truth came out. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked after I'd laid out all the evidence. "I mean, I agree that Caroline needs to face consequences for what she's done, but are you prepared for how this is going to affect your whole family?" It was a fair question and one I'd been wrestling with for weeks. But every time I wavered, I thought about all the times Caroline had taken something that belonged to me, all the times our parents had made me feel like I wasn't good enough, all the lies that had been told and retold until they became accepted truth. "I'm tired of living in a world built on her lies," I told Alex. "And I'm tired of watching her profit from deception while the rest of us play by the rules." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then I'll be there with you, whatever happens." The night of the anniversary party arrived with all the fanfare Caroline could orchestrate. The resort had been decorated to recreate the magic of their original wedding, complete with the same flowers, the same music, and even the same menu. Caroline wore a stunning silver gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and James looked handsome in his designer tuxedo, playing his part with the skill of someone who'd had 5 years of practice. I arrived alone. Alex was working late and would join me later, carrying a small purse that contained a USB drive with all my evidence and a folder of printed photographs that would serve as visual aids for what I was planning to reveal. The party was everything Caroline's events always were: elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. Our parents circulated through the crowd, beaming with pride as guests congratulated them on their daughter's perfect marriage. Caroline and James worked the room like seasoned politicians, accepting praise and well wishes with practiced grace. I watched them for the first hour, marveling at the performance. They really were good at this, too good. If I hadn't spent months documenting their real lives, I might have believed in their happiness myself. The evening proceeded according to Caroline's carefully planned schedule. There were cocktails and appetizers, followed by a seated dinner where James gave a toast that brought tears to several guests' eyes. He spoke about love, commitment, and the joy of finding your perfect partner, all while looking directly at Caroline with an expression that would have convinced anyone who didn't know better. But I did know better. And as the evening wore on, I felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on me like a physical force. Every congratulation Caroline received, every toast to their happiness, every comment about their fairy tale romance, felt like another lie piled on top of an already enormous mountain of deception. The moment I'd been waiting for came during the dessert course, when Caroline stood up to make her own speech thanking everyone for celebrating their love. She looked radiant in the soft lighting, every inch the perfect wife grateful for her perfect life. "5 years ago," she began, her voice carrying easily through the elegant dining room, "James and I promised to love each other for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Tonight, I want to thank all of you for witnessing that promise and for supporting us as we've built our life together." She paused for effect, smiling at James with what appeared to be genuine affection. "Marriage isn't always easy," she continued, "but when you find the right person, when you find true love, every challenge becomes manageable. James is my best friend, my partner, my soulmate. I can't imagine my life without him." The guests murmured their approval, some wiping away tears at this beautiful declaration of enduring love. Our mother was practically glowing with pride, and our father was nodding approvingly at what he undoubtedly saw as validation of his daughter's perfect choices. It was then that I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "Caroline," I said, my voice cutting through the romantic atmosphere like a knife, "before you go any further with this touching speech about true love and perfect partnerships, there's something I think our guests should know." The room fell silent, 200 pairs of eyes turning toward me with curiosity and confusion. Caroline's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Victoria, this isn't really the time," she began, but I was already reaching into my purse for the folder of photographs. "Actually, I think this is exactly the time," I said, standing and walking toward the front of the room where Caroline and James were still positioned. You see, I've spent the last 6 months documenting the truth about my sister's perfect marriage, and I think it's time everyone knew what that truth actually looks like. I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph, a clear shot of James entering Sarah's apartment building at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks earlier. This is your husband, Caroline, entering his girlfriend's apartment for one of their regular evening dates. Her name is Sarah Chen, and they've been together for over 3 years. A collective gasp went through the room. James had gone completely pale, and Caroline was staring at me with an expression of shock and fury that was more genuine than any emotion I'd seen from her all evening. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Our mother's voice was shrill with panic. "I'm telling the truth, Mom. Something that's been in short supply in this family for far too long." I pulled out the next photograph, Caroline and Sarah having lunch together, clearly engaged in an intense conversation. "But here's the interesting part," I continued, my voice steady despite the chaos I was creating. "Caroline knows about the affair. In fact, she facilitates it. Because you see, their marriage isn't a love story at all. It's a business arrangement." James started to stand, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. I have so much more to share." I pulled out copies of financial documents, business filings, and bank records that I'd obtained through careful investigation and a few strategic calls to public records offices. Caroline's consulting business? It doesn't exist. Not in any real sense. It's a front for laundering money from James's family trust. James pays Caroline to pretend to be his wife so that he can maintain his career at a conservative law firm while carrying on his real relationship with Sarah, whose father happens to be one of the firm's biggest clients. The room was in complete chaos now. Guests were whispering frantically to each other, our parents were staring at Caroline with expressions of dawning horror, and James looked like he was about to be sick. But I wasn't finished. "But that's not even the worst part," I said, pulling out the final set of documents. "Caroline has been using her position as James's wife to gather confidential information about his clients, which she then sells to their competitors. The perfect marriage has been funding a corporate espionage operation." Caroline finally found her voice. "That's not true," she shouted, her composure completely shattered. "Victoria is lying. She's always been jealous of me, and now she's trying to destroy my marriage out of spite." But the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss as jealousy or sibling rivalry. I had photographs, financial records, recorded phone conversations, and documented proof of every claim I was making. "I have 6 months of documentation, Caroline," I said calmly. "I can prove every single thing I've said." James was the first to break. "It's true," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chaos in the room. "The marriage is fake. I've been paying Caroline to maintain the illusion so I could stay with Sarah without destroying my career." He looked at Caroline with something approaching pity. "But I had no idea about the corporate espionage, Caroline. If that's true, you've put both of our careers at risk." Caroline's perfect facade was crumbling in real time. The composed, elegant woman who had stood before us minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and trapped. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just a simple arrangement, but then I realized I could use the access to make real money, not just the allowance James was giving me." Our father, who had been silent throughout my revelations, finally spoke. "Caroline, tell me Victoria is lying. Tell me you haven't built your entire life on fraud and theft." But Caroline couldn't tell him that because it wasn't true. Instead, she looked around the room at the faces of 200 guests who had come to celebrate her perfect marriage and saw only shock, disappointment, and disgust. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then she turned and ran from the room, leaving behind her husband, her family, and the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. The aftermath of that evening was swift and merciless. James, realizing that his association with Caroline's criminal activities could destroy his legal career, immediately filed for divorce and turned over all the evidence he had about her corporate espionage to the authorities. Sarah, horrified to learn that their secret relationship had been funding criminal activity, ended things with James and moved to another city to start over. Caroline was arrested 3 days after the anniversary party and charged with multiple counts of corporate espionage, fraud, and money laundering. The trial made headlines in the business section of every major newspaper, with reporters fascinated by the story of the socialite whose perfect marriage had been a cover for white-collar crime. Our parents were devastated, not just by Caroline's actions but by the realization that they had enabled her behavior for decades through their preferential treatment and willingness to look the other way when things didn't add up. They aged visibly in the months following the scandal, finally confronting the role their favoritism had played in creating the conditions that allowed Caroline to believe she was above consequences. As for me, the revelation of Caroline's crimes had an unexpected effect on my own life. My photography business boomed as people became fascinated by the woman who had exposed such an elaborate fraud. I was hired to document several high-profile events, and my work was featured in magazines that praised my eye for hidden truths. More importantly, I finally felt free from Caroline's shadow. With her perfect life revealed as an elaborate lie, I could stop measuring myself against an impossible standard and start appreciating the honest, modest success I'd built through actual hard work. Alex and I got engaged 6 months after Caroline's trial, and we're planning a small, intimate wedding that will be everything her elaborate ceremony wasn't: genuine, honest, and based on real love rather than performance. Caroline was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, though she'll likely serve less with good behavior. I've received several letters from her over the past year, alternating between apologies and accusations, but I haven't responded to any of them. I'm not ready to forgive her, and I'm not sure I ever will be. The truth is that Caroline's deception went beyond fraud and theft. It was a betrayal of everyone who had ever believed in her, everyone who had ever felt inadequate in comparison to her supposed perfection. She had stolen not just money and information, but years of our lives that we'd spent questioning our own worth. But in the end, the truth did what truth always does: it set us free. Free from the lies, free from the comparisons, free from the shadow of someone else's false perfection. And for the first time in my 34 years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, living an honest life, building real relationships, and finding happiness in truth rather than performance. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to live in someone else's lie anymore.